All right, guys, we made it to the very last unit. This is going to be chapter 16, which is waste generation and waste disposal. We have one more chapter, chapter 17. May or may not have an ed puzzle for that. Not really sure yet, but let's talk about chapter 16, which is waste generation. All right. So first of all, we have to think about waste as a system. Essentially, waste is going to be everything that's coming on the outputs of this system. So we have our inputs, any type of materials, any type of energy, and waste as a general term is going to be whatever we are not able to use and reuse. So once we've used this product, anything we're not able to reuse or refurbish or replant is going to be something, is going to be that output, that waste material. This could be waste energy. So think back to our energy unit. We talked about, especially non-renewable energy, we have a net loss of energy because at every single step, processing, transportation, refinement, we're losing some energy. In general, we're going to be focusing mostly on this top one, raw materials, a material that can't be recycled or disposed of. This waste for the top part of the outputs, part of the cycle. We are going to be generally talking about something called MSW. MSW is a fancy term for waste products that are not able to be reused. So anything that's going to landfills, anything that we've built or created or consumed, and now we have this waste product that we don't really know what to do with afterwards, that's going to be called municipal solid waste. What we're throwing away in our trash cans, what's going down out of our houses, especially, is going to be this municipal solid waste. We have our blue line on the left, which is our total waste generation, and our orange line on the right-hand side, which is going to be the per capita or per person. Remember, per capita from, I forgot, there was a unit when we talked about that. So in general, not only are we seeing that the total worldwide total amount of waste generation is increasing, but people could argue, well, the human population is increasing as well. That's why this orange line is very important as well. This orange line is showing us, yes, the human population is increasing, which makes sense why we're seeing this total amount of waste increasing, but also that per capita or per person generation is also increasing as well. We are seeing a slight downwards trend. Hopefully this is going in time with, we're doing a lot more of like reduce, reuse, recycle. We're doing a lot more promotions for Earth Day. So hopefully we continue seeing this down. I want to see a graph that's like 20 up to 2020, but we'll see. Okay. It's getting harder and harder to dispose of this because, like I said in the last slide, our human population is growing. And so objectively, the bigger the population is, the more waste you're going to produce, whether that's human waste or that's going to be material or consumable waste. This is crazy. So today, the average person living in the United States produces about 4.4 pounds of waste every single day. You might think that's a lot, but think about every single thing, all the paper towels you've used, all the food wrappers that you've used, and even like when you're disposing of long things, because this is an annual average. So if you think about like long-term, like large things you've thrown away, if we divide that up by 365, it ends up being about 4.4. Okay, so what exactly are we looking at? When we're looking at composition and source, we can really kind of start to organize and see where are all these coming from. So by actual composition, the biggest thing that we are actually, throwing away is going to be our paper products. This is good because paper products oftentimes are very easily able to be recycled. And this is probably the one thing we're going to talk about later, that of things that are sent to recycling, paper is the one that's most likely to actually be recycled. But also think about paper towels. If you have the cardboard egg cartons, these also, it's a good thing to see that paper is the biggest thing because this is the one that's the easiest to turn into compost or into a compostable material. We'll talk about that in a second. Right after paper is going to be our food scraps, our yard trimmings, and plastics. Again, very good to see that yard trimmings and food scraps are the other two main sources because those also very easily can become compostable, and just eating less food or reducing our food intake can also reduce this one as well. Plastics is the one that's a little concerning. This one would probably want to just reduce how much we create in general, but we'll get to that later. Actually, where it's coming from, mostly it's packaging. That's why I'm always like promoting people like bring your own to-go containers to restaurants or bring your own bags to the grocery store. Reuse your little vegetable baggies, plastic vegetable baggies. If we can reduce just the packaging, that's going to put a huge reduction in how much waste we're actually producing as a society. Waste are two different main materials, and we're going to get into this, especially when we talk about compost. Biodegradable, bio meaning life, degradable being able to be broken down, and non-biodegradable. So this essentially is, can I break this down, and can this actually deteriorate in a reasonable time scale? Non-biodegradable would be something like styrofoam. Styrofoam is something that can be broken down, but it's going to take like thousands of years. So it's like essentially still non-biodegradable, though they are making compostable packaged peanuts, which is very good to see. Yeah, cool. I feel like I'm going a little fast, but I want to, get through these as fast as possible. Okay, so lots and lots of waste being produced in our world. But what exactly is 10 billion metric tons? Like, what does that actually mean to us? So 10 billion metric tons is about, oh my goodness, 22 trillion pounds, which essentially is about 34.5 million great blue whales, largest mammal, which essentially is almost 300,000 cruise ships. And that is by year in just one country, the United States. We are definitely one of the top wasters of the nation, not really a badge of honor. And so this is really kind of hoping to put into perspective what a crisis this is, because my question always goes when we're talking about waste, like waste is my one thing that I like really get on my soapbox for, because my big thing is, where does it go and what happens when we run out of space? So we're going to be talking about how can we get this number down? How can we reduce the amount of waste that we're actually producing as a nation, as a society, and as an individual? Electronic waste is also something that's really become a problem in the past couple of years. In 2012, it was really only 2% of the waste being produced, which doesn't seem like too much, but it really does add up. I mean, if we think about like 2% out of almost 300,000 cruise ships, it ends up being quite a bit of waste. And I really foresee this number only increasing. E-waste is especially harmful because a lot of times, a lot of our computers are containing things like mercury. It's going to contain things like different hard metals. And so as these things are going to be going into landfills, and as they start breaking down, there's a lot of harmful chemicals and toxins that can be released into our environment, could maybe even trickle down out of our landfills and into our water supplies. And so we really don't want that to be happening. I mean, think back to our energy unit. We talked about one of the big negatives about nuclear energy is that they produced radioactive waste. This e-waste is kind of on that same scale of hazardous waste that, like, what do you do with it? You don't want it to be near anybody because you don't want to cause any health issues to anybody. So where does it go is really the big old question for this. Unfortunately, our generation is known as the generation of waste. Yay. Again, not really a badge of honor. We've really gotten to a point in our society when so much things are made out of plastic and so many things are single use. Think about if you're in a club or organization, every single banquet you've been to, I don't want to like guarantee, but I bet you a lot of the banquets you've been to had plastic utensils or styrofoam or paper plates. And when you're done with that, everyone just threw it away. It's convenient. It's easy. I'm guilty of it too. Anytime my family goes to the beach, we're using plastics like crazy, to-go boxes like crazy. And so because we have these single-use products, our amount of waste that we're producing has skyrocketed in the past couple decades. Yeah, more than tripled. Sorry, I'm going to get a little bringing myself down. So how can we make this better? How can we attempt to? You've always heard, or these are very familiar, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. What you may or may not have already known is that these are actually in order of priority. So reduce is the main thing we want to do. Reuse is the second main thing. Recycle is the third main thing. But we really want to focus on these top 2 first before we even think about recycling. Sometimes I feel like our brains automatically go to, can we recycle this? Yay, let's recycle this. But the best thing we want to do in science, in life, in waste prevention is to reduce how much we're making in the first place. A lot of you guys are always like, oh yeah, I went to Goodwill. I went and thrifted this. And I'm always like, yay, please keep doing that. If we can reduce how much we're doing, then we don't even have to deal with whether or not we have to reuse it. We don't have to deal with, can I recycle this? Try to consume less, try to use less to begin with. Once we've reduced how much is actually being used, now we think, can I reuse this multiple times? I'm always happy when I hear you guys Or I see you guys with like your plastic baggies and you're using them as lunch boxes. Or you're saying, oh, I use these to pick up dog poop. Cool. Yes, please reuse these as much as possible. Get things that can be reusable as much as possible. That way, once we've created something, we can use it as many times as possible. Then and only then do we think, can we recycle this? We really hope to recycle as many things as possible. I know America doesn't have the best infrastructure in place right now to actually recycle things home base. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But that's why this is like the third, like if we have to, it should be the last resort. Okay, we have two different types of recycling. We have closed loop recycling and open loop recycling. When you hear of recycling, you're probably most likely thinking about closed loop recycling. Sorry, I'm going to try to get that term good. Closed loop recycling is whenever we take a substance, we create something out of it, we use that product, and when we recycle it, we turn it back into the exact same thing. So this would be like if I had this sheet of paper, I recycled this sheet of paper, and new paper was made out of it. That's going to be that closed loop recycling. In the example here, we have carpet fibers to make carpet. Then that carpet was shredded, recycled, turned back into carpet fibers. But carpet is made one more time. So closed loop recycling, we're making the same thing. This would be like if you're also making plastic products out of melted down former plastic. Open loop recycling is when we take one thing and we actually make something new out of it. So in the example here, we have our water bottles. Water bottles could then be recovered, and these water bottles could then be made into, like, say, a shirt. So you might have seen, sorry, I have one right here. You might have seen sometimes you'll get these reusable bags, and the reusable bags will be said like made out of 1,000, that's probably exact, made out of 100 water bottles. This would be open loop recycling because this used to be water bottles, and now it's been turned into a bag, which is not what it was originally. So closed loop, we're making the same thing again. Open loop, we are making something new out of a product, still recycling it, but it's not the original product, how it used to be. This is encouraging to see that this is increasing. So this one, we're looking essentially at the same amount of data, but kind of like in the last one with about waste production, we're looking at total amount in actual weight and amount. And then we're looking in the orange as what's the percentage wise. So we are seeing quite a bit more of recycling. What I do not know about this data is whether it's telling us how much is being sent to recycling centers, or is it telling us how much from what is actually being sent to recycling centers is actually being reused. That would be a piece of information I'd be curious to know. But we are seeing a dramatic increase in this, which is for me very encouraging. Okay, I think we have like one more slide and then we got a joke. So this is actually a really cool photo. This is from San Francisco. I actually got to tour this facility, and it is like, I mean, y'all saw me an energy tour, like my eyes are saucers at this place. So what happens when you actually send things to recycling? The first thing that's going to happen is it's going to go to a mixed single stream recycling. Mixed single stream recycling means that all the recycling, whether it's glass, paper, plastic, aluminum, everything's going to one facility. And once it gets to the facility, it actually gets sorted. Back in the day, we used to actually have to hand sort our recycling, and then we would have like separate companies pick up separate recycling, and it just wasn't efficient. People weren't actually sorting. People didn't want to recycle. And then sometimes people would, I mean, you would still have to sort it anyways because people would still put things in the wrong places. So the sorting was going to happen. So they're like, let's just scrap that. Everything be sent to the same place. Let's sort it here because we're going to have to sort it anyways. So some of the sorting actually is done by machines. Oh my gosh, there's like these really cool machines that like blow air. And that makes like paper products float up because paper gets blown up by air. So that's what separates paper from plastics is they blow air up. And that's going to help sort up a lot of the paper goods from plastic, aluminum, and glass. Really cool machines. Then it's going to go down these conveyor belts, but there's actually going to be people on hand sorting things as well. So pulling things that don't need to be there. It's a very, very efficient process. Once it's actually been sorted, so these things are in the United States. Paper recycling plants are located in the United States. Plastic, as far as I know, last time I checked, it's not. So once this happens, we still have to send it overseas, which is where sometimes we get into some problems, which is why, again, number one way to reduce waste is to reduce how much we're using in the first place. Here it is, joke time. A red ship once collided with a blue ship. Now both crews are marooned. Okay. All right, composting. You've probably heard of this before. Composting is this amazing process where we take any sort of organic material, such as orange peels, food waste, paper products, yard trimmings, and we actually are going to be tilling it with our soil, breaking it down with worms, with our decomposers and our detrivores to make this extremely nutrient-packed soil. It's literally like win-win-win situation. The only negative is that sometimes it smells bad, but it's win-win-win because not only are we reducing how much waste is being sent to landfills because we're taking the waste and repurposing it, but we also are making this incredibly rich, nutrient dense and packed soil. And we were talking about in agriculture that oftentimes, especially if we're not rotating our crops, soil quality in general is going to decrease over time. So this is like a vitamin boost, like an energy drink, I don't know, for our soil. So this can help our soil, which is going to give us better food yields. This is going to give us better like bang for our buck. It's not going to be as much drainage on the soil itself. Sorry, like my words are not working today. It's actually really exciting to see that a lot of companies, if you think back to that diagram we looked at the very, very beginning, remember we said the biggest source of waste is packaging. I don't think you guys can see that. So if we can actually make packaging compostable, that's reducing how much waste we're producing. Sun chips, they've made a couple bags. I think they're still doing this as far as I know, that can be put into a compost bin. This is awesome. To-go boxes. Oh, it makes me so excited when a company or a restaurant brings me out a compostable bin, takeout container, and not a freaking styrofoam. I hate styrofoam. It just stays in our landfills forever. So if we can make packaging compostable, holy cow, that's going to reduce how much waste we're producing. And then we don't have to deal with all the problems about like, oh my gosh, what do we do with all this landfill crap? Sorry. Carlsberg, I don't even know what this company is, but I thought it was really cool that they're going to try to make a green bottle. Glass can be recycling, but right now at this point, it's actually more expensive to recycle glass than to make new glass. They're working on making that more efficient. But if we can make compostable glass bottles, yay, good times all around. Ha ha ha. I love this. This new machine is so great. So much less wasteful making a whole pot of coffee, but then you get all the K-cups. So single-use cups, really convenient, but end up producing a lot more waste overall. Okay, so if I wasn't able to reduce, I wasn't able to reuse, and I wasn't able to recycle, what's going to happen to that waste? Most of the time, it's going to end up going to a landfill or it's going to be incinerated. We're going to talk about landfills first, incineration last, and then we're going to hopefully wrap this up in a little bit. The main term for when we think about landfills, it can be what we call sanitary landfills. These are new age, and it's the current landfill practice that we use today. These are really important because what essentially happens is we've got a hole in the ground, but then kind of like those manure lagoons way back when we talked about land use and agriculture, we're going to line these with protective coating, and this is going to protect our groundwater source that could be, or any aquifers that could be below these landfills. It's also going to protect the soil itself, which, soil grows food. I don't really want toxic waste in my food. So there's going to be lined with clay or plastic liners. And there's also going to be a collection system for, I can never pronounce this word. I say leachate, but I've also heard it pronounced leachate, lechate. Okay, so leachate or leachate is going to be essentially as it rains or as things start decomposing and decompressing and breaking down, a liquid is going to be going through. As this liquid goes through, it's going to be collecting and extracting, just as the property of water is, various chemical compounds. What we end up with is this substance that can be extremely toxic depending on what was actually in the landfill itself. We do have the plastic liners, such as the clay, that should hopefully prevent most of the leachate actually going through, but thank goodness, a lot of landfills are going to actually have a collection system that grabs it before it actually seeps down even further and helps it not produce or pollute our groundwater systems. So here's that sanitary landfill. Again, we've got a big old hole in the ground. It's lined with clay. It's lined with plastic. We have a compactor to help us get as much waste as possible in this hole in the ground. these pipes underneath, this is our leachate collection system. I gotta look this up. Leachate. The water, it's going to collect this water and actually take it to a wastewater treatment plant. Depending on how toxic it is, we may be able to just go through that primary, secondary, tertiary wastewater treatment. If we can do that, repurpose that water, fantastic. If not, then we might have to just take it to a toxic waste plant. Also cool thing, as things are going to be decomposing, sometimes methane, CH4, is going to be released. And some landfills actually have number 5, which is a methane extraction system. It's going to retrieve and extract that methane gas. And now, woo, we got an energy source. So we can burn it off or collect and use it as fuel. Yay, yay, yay. Though methane is a greenhouse gas, but we'll worry about that later. So there's that groundwater that we are protecting by having this leachate collection system. Okay, I think this is just kind of a little bit more of the same thing. Yeah, we've got our solid waste, we have our clay liners, we have that leachate actually collecting it, that's sending it off to the wastewater treatment plants. We have the gas recovery. Yeah, same thing, just different view. Woo. Okay. One thing I wanted to point out really quick on this is that oftentimes when landfills do get full, we will sometimes cover them up with grass and soil and actually like cover it up and then repurpose that land. And sometimes you don't even know that you may be standing on top of the landfill. But there's only so much space in the world. I know we talked in land and use and agriculture, the amount of land that's actually arable, farmable, things that we can actually dig into and utilize. So if the population is growing and food necessity is growing and waste is growing, I always am like, what's going to happen when we run out of space? Like, what are we going to do with all this junk? So actually a little like fun fact, not fun fact, just fact in general, 1987, there was a ship that had 3,200 tons of garbage. It left New York. And I was like, okay, let me go find a landfill to dump this in. It sailed for more than 5 months, but no one would accept this garbage because places were running out of places to actually store it. So here's that garbage. That's 3,200 tons of garbage. It finally, like, look at this. So they were like, oh, let's try Florida. Let's try Louisiana. I don't know why they tried to take here. Let's try Belize. Let's try Cuba. And no one would take this garbage because, again, we're running out of spaces and no one wants trash. Again, reduce how much trash. Eventually, it went all the way back to New York and we just ended up, most of it was burned. And then, so we'll talk about it a little bit. When we burn things, we usually get about 1/4 of the size. So now we've reduced it to 1/4 the size. It's now 430 tons of just ash, and we still have to bury it. Ash, unfortunately, can't be repurposed once we go through that incineration process. So we just had to bury it somewhere. So really unfortunate thing. I forgot what this is, I'm sorry. Okay, so anyways, sometimes, again, we take these landfills and we can, I think you've heard of like golf courses being on top of like landfills, which is interesting to think about. I guess because golf courses are very hilly usually. So we can, once we fill up that landfill, we can cover this with grass and soil, and you may never even know that it's a landfill. But think back to nuclear waste. NIMBY comes into play a lot. So in nuclear waste, we talked about something called NIMBY, not in my backyard. Nobody really wants, if you had to like take a survey, I guarantee a majority of people don't want a landfill in their backyard or don't want to live next to a landfill. And so it's like, how do you choose where the landfills go? Because nobody wants it. And there ends up being a lot of protests and petitions to not have a landfill right next door or right in your backyard. Unfortunately, a lot of times this means that where do landfills get placed? If they do have to put it place people, it's usually by people who don't have as much power to fight against it. And so then it feels like we're taking advantage of people who don't have the resources to defend themselves, which is just unethical in my opinion. So this ends up being a huge problem. What waste we're not able to put in a landfill, one way to actually reduce how much is going to the landfill itself is a process called incineration. I talked about this a little bit when we talked about that barge, that ship from New York. When we actually go through the incineration process, we take the garbage and it actually can reduce it by 75%. So it's going to reduce it to about 1/4 of the original size. It does convert it into ash. The ash the ash still isn't really something we can repurpose. So it oftentimes ends up just being in a landfill anyways, but hey, I mean, it's at least 1/4 the size. So oftentimes once the waste is actually taken to the place and it's brought into the hopper and it's actually burned, we're gonna have two different types of ash that is produced. The solid ash is going to actually fall through and into the ash bunker. Some of it's gonna be called fly ash. And this is what you probably think of as like when you typically think of ash, like volcanic ash, it's the airborne stuff. So the airborne fly ash is going to be collected by our baghouse filters. You might recognize those from our air pollution unit. If not, we'll review it before the AP exam, and that's going to be collected as well. Once we remove it, it's going to be actually taken into a landfill itself, buried somewhere. One cool thing is that sometimes this whole process, because we're using so much heat, we can actually take this process and actually utilize some of the heat that's being produced to create energy. So we call this the waste to energy conversion. So not only are we reducing how much is actually going into the landfill, but if we can also produce energy at the same time, just look at all those thumbs up all around. Yes, hazardous waste. Some things such as batteries, sludge, that electronic waste that we talked about earlier is toxic. And so we really don't want it to go anywhere near human beings. We don't want it to go into landfills that are nearby ecosystems because we don't want any toxic substances. So some places we actually have specialized waste, not waste treatment, but like waste dealing with, I guess, waste processing plants. There we go, waste processing plants that are specifically for hazardous waste. So this is where our, especially like sometimes you go to like the doctors and you see like, like this is where all of our biohazard stuff goes. So anything that's like hazardous waste is going to go to a special place. Usually these are going to be treated first. Once we've treated and made something less toxic or less harmful to the environment, then we can go ahead and take it to a regularly waste treatment plant or waste processing plant. Oh my gosh, we're at the last part. How exciting. We're going to talk a little bit about laws. Everybody loves legislation. I'm not good at government, so there's two main laws we'll be talking about. One of them is the RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So this one is in particular going to be tying in with what we just talked about, which is hazardous waste. We really don't want this hazardous waste going anywhere. We especially don't want it to go anywhere near organic life, such as humans, animals, our plants, our ecosystems, our insects. Biodiversity is really important, so we want to make sure we protect it as much as possible. So if we can track where everything's going, essentially this is like from source to distribution, source to distribution tracking, also known as cradle to grave. So as soon as we create something that has the potential to become hazardous waste, this law makes sure that we know exactly where that waste is going. If I create anything that could be a problem further down the road, I want to know exactly where that's going, so that way I can track it and then recapture it before it gets disposed with regular trash. I want to make sure that I know where this is going. That way I know that I can treat it. That way I know it's not harming or doing at least the least amount of disruption or destruction as possible. This is particularly going to be going and tying up with that hazardous waste and that e-waste. The other one, this one's more broad. So while the other one was mostly dealing with toxic or hazardous waste, this is going to be the CLRCLA, the CLRCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, also known as super fun. This one is going to be mostly affecting our chemical and petroleum industries. Petroleum especially is going to be making our plastic waste. So a lot of our plastic packaging is made out of petroleum or oil compounds. Essentially, whenever we have abandoned or non-operating hazardous waste sites, we want to be able to clean those up to make sure that nothing is, again, leaching out into our systems, nothing else is affecting our ecosystems. We're also going to see, in general, if there's anything, whether it's hazardous or not, can it actually harm human health in some way? So what comes to mind for me is that nuclear reactors. We've talked about that high level and low level hazardous and nuclear waste. High level waste, nuclear waste being those fuel rods where the reactions themselves were actually happening. So if a nuclear power plant is to shut down, I want to know exactly where all that stuff is being disposed. I want to track those fuel rods. I want to track those high level and low level nuclear waste to make sure that however they're being disposed of, it's not going to pose a problem to human health. Oh my gosh, y'all, we're on the last 2 slides. Integrated waste management is kind of our overall summary thing. So we talked about reduce, reuse, recycle. Integrative waste management, which always reminds me of integrative pest management. This is an eco-friendly, not eco-friendly, but it's a more sustainable approach to waste. Sustainable being, how can we reduce processes and make them better for future generations? So in integrated waste management, at every single part of the waste production and consumption process, I want to look at ways that I can reduce how much waste is being produced at every single step of the process. So at the manufacturing, at the use, and at the waste process, I want to find ways to reduce holistically, whole process-wise, so that what's actually being disposed of is as minimal as possible. So when I'm manufacturing, how can I change packaging design to make it more efficient? How can I use less resources in this? How can I make things that are compostable to make sure I'm putting less in those landfills? When I'm actually using stuff, how can I reduce my use? How can I reuse things? And how can I repurpose things so that I'm able to use things as much as possible? Again, reducing how much waste is actually being generated. Finally, that waste. Once I produce that waste, anything that gets thrown away, how can we find ways to convert it into energy? How can we find ways to repurpose it? So if we're able to recycle, fantastic. If we're able to compost, fantastic. I even heard that there's a place that will actually burn paper that's found in landfills and generate electricity from it. Amazing. Look at all that stuff. Look at all that great ideas. Again, we're trying to look at this holistically to reduce how much is actually being disposed of. You guys are fantastic. I cannot express how lucky and thankful I am every single day to be y'all's teacher. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. No matter what's going on in your life, hang in there. I believe in you. I really do. I really do. We've got a joke. That's not a joke. This is a riddle. I'm as light as a feather, but not even the strongest person can hold me for more than 5 minutes. What am I? Find out next week. Hope you guys have a good day. Bye.